right. Welcoming everybody to the space. It's an honor and a joy for me to get to share something that I am just irrationally passionate about. And it is not just story, but really understanding story as a sacred healing art and as a connection to both earth, the unseen world of spirit. And it's really where we get to understand ourselves in the most exalted expressions of, as humans, when we get to alchemize those two energies through the spark of our life, of our heart, and what can we create in the world when we meet it in this way. So over the next hour, I'm going to be going on a journey with you. I see you from BC, Canada, and from South Africa, but working in the UK. And we're going to be going on this journey. And I really invite you to come fully present, come as present as you can. That is one of the gifts of storytelling, that when we're in our full presence, we get to go on the deepest journey of our own personal sanctuary of our mind, of our consciousness. And this is really designed to inspire how you think about your life, your world, the stories that you're in, the stories that are coming at you. And so we're going to put on our sacred storytelling goggles and go for a journey. So I am going to share this beautiful presentation that was just got to co-create with one of the alumni from the School for Sacred Storytelling. He's not only a talented storyteller, but a talented illustrator. And so we're lucky ducks in this community to get to have Mark Smith's artwork that also kind of brings to life this 4-day journey that we're going on. And this is day one. So this, in particular, our focus today is what is it to approach storytelling as a sacred practice and as a tool for healing. And so that's going to be the lens that we're looking at and that how we're really meeting story today. And I love beginning things with a quote. But before we go into the words, I really want to invite you to close your eyes. Don't look at the words yet. Close your eyes. As storytellers, we are the seers of the world. And so I'm inviting your sight to come inside, as if you could turn it inside and really allow yourself to see yourself as this energetic being, as if you could see all the organs, all the bones, all the veins in your body, get to see the miracle of your own life. And I invite you just to call all your energy home, as if there were these strands of golden light from your body out into the world. And what we're doing right now is we're tapping into a practice of our imaginal information, but also our intuition. So some of you are going to start to feel that energy. I'm inviting you to invite all that energy home, to come all the way back home, all the to-do lists, all the things you're supposed to do, bring all that energy home right now, and see if you can also begin to feel the energy come back to yourself. And some of you are going to have that experience, and some of you aren't. There's no right or wrong way. It's just this moment of beginning to attune. And that's what we're looking at as storytellers, that this is our instrument. Our body, our mind, our consciousness is our instrument. And so I'm inviting you just to breathe into it. And breathe into your intention. What brought you here today? What called you to the threshold of sacred storytelling? And is it because you've got a big story in you that's ready to come out, that needs your voice, that needs your power, that needs your courage? Some skills, some technique, some community to support it? Or is the muse knocking down your door saying, oh, please tell me this new story? Or the creative muses singing to you through the ethers? Or perhaps you're Cantadora, one of those rare ones among us who feel compelled to carry the old stories. I just invite you to attune to, why are you here? We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. This is a quote by Rebecca Solnit. They tell us to love or to hate, to see or be seen, and often, too often, stories will saddle us, and they ride us, and they whip us onward, and they tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. I always pause here because there's this, one of my teachers always taught me, Stephen Jenkinson, this language of we is a dangerous word right now because, look, even those of us who are on Zoom right now, we're all around the world. There is no collective perspective that we have. I can't even assume that this is true for you, so I just want to pause right now and just honor that. But I also really want to honor the author and her intention and the power behind it. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear those stories, to question them, to pause and hear silence, to name those stories, and then become a storyteller. I mean, she basically taught, a year's worth of curriculum in that one paragraph, in terms of what is it to go on the journey of becoming a true storyteller, and that we've got to be able to get our focus on what is the body of a story, like what is it, and can we see them? Can we distinguish between the different kinds and their purpose, their intention? What are they in service to? And based on that, then do we have our self-determination about what stories will we each carry, both individually and as a collective? So I love this simple guidance of, what is the journey of a storyteller and what is the responsibility of a storyteller? Today, we're going to go on a little journey, and I love that Mark has brought us the red thread, that will guide us through this, and that as storytellers, we're weavers, and I'm going to introduce you to a little bit of a global perspective of storytelling and the power of language. We're going to talk about what is story. This is going to be an interactive opportunity. I love hearing what you have to say. We're going to talk about what is a sacred story, what distinguishes a sacred story from a story. We're going to do a little bit of an exploration about what does it mean to be a conscious creator in our times and how to engage story as a healing tool. So that's the journey we're going to go on today. So who am I? I am a woman of made of stories, just like you are men and women made of stories. And I learned the language of storytelling really as a very young child. I grew up on a farm in Vermont, and a time when they opened the door, they were like, go out and play, come back, before it gets too dark. It was like really too dark. And I had this unique opportunity to spend excessive amounts of time alone in nature and to be with the rivers and to be with the rocks and to be with the seasons and the mud and the snow and all of that. And I didn't realize that at that time I was formulating what would be a very foundational relationship to story. It wouldn't be till 30 years later that I would come to understand how closely woven my connection to nature is my connection to storytelling. I learned the responsibility of storytelling, that what you put out comes back. When I was 16 years old, my best friend committed suicide, and we did not have any access to like resources or how to be with young death or suicide, and I was beside myself. And what I did was I went to my sanctuary. And my sanctuary up until that point was books, stories, writing. And I went there to make sense of life, of death, of grief. I'm 16. I'm not saying any of that. I just went there as an escape, right? And what I found was this incredible healing modality. I ended up writing a play because that's where my passion was at the time, was in the theater and the arts. And that play ended up winning a role in a spot in a young playwriting festival. So I got to see my play about suicide on stage, played by actors. And that's when I learned the responsibility that what you put out comes back. Because while I shared my grief, a lot of people came back to me afterwards sharing their grief. And I didn't understand what it is to be a guardian of stories and a guardian of holding that place to not only tell, but to listen. I learned the business of storytelling because I went straight off to New York City out of high school. I was gifted with parents that encouraged me to follow my passion. I got to study with Sandy Meisner at the neighborhood playhouse, and I worked off Broadway, and I worked in summer stock, and I learned at a very young age that I had no interest spending my life speaking other people's words. That I could feel that there was something very powerful happening in the room. I could feel that there was this energy, and I was absolutely enthralled by what we were creating. But I also wanted to do something with that energy. I wanted to know how to harness it because we would do all this work, all this joy, all this play, all this journey, and then we would open the door of the theater and it went out. And so part of the question that I started to walk with was, how can we catalyze that energy for social good, for social change? I started to learn about that good intentions are not enough. And I was looking for this way to weave my passion of environmental justice, social justice, and protection and humans. Like, how do we be good humans? How do we heal ourselves, take care of the planet? And I ended up getting what I thought was my dream job. I ended up producing the Green Channel at Al Gore's television network. And I really thought I'd nailed it, right? Here I was. I could amplify the voices of those who couldn't be heard. We could talk about environmental issues. We could do it in a global way. And I learned that good in people with good intentions is not enough if you don't understand what you're doing with every story that you're telling. And that it's a bigger story that I'll get into, but it was one of the most critical lessons that I got to learn, that news and information is not where social change is happening. It's in the source of the change is happening in the stories that we're telling. And that was such an eye-opening experience that radically transformed my path, that I got to go. Actually, Gloria was there. A big part of this shift and this change was I was like, oh, if it's not in news and information, and if we're building this very unique, powerful energy in the realm of story, how can we direct that now towards something that has momentum and has roots in our consciousness and real change? And that led me into the deep into the world of storytelling. And we started doing this work called story ceremonies. We started teaching a program called Myth, Magic, and Medicine, where you understand your myths, you understand how magical you are when you can create stories, and you understand your true medicine, the gift and the power of your voice. And that curriculum began to grow. And because I'm a storyteller, and storytellers, it's only one voice, not the whole thing. I love including other storytellers and other perspectives to have a big story that we can all be in. Before I knew it, I'd kind of accidentally started the School for Sacred Storytelling. And that's really the truth. It wasn't like I set out to do it. It's that I kept one step after another. And the next thing I knew, more and more people were coming, more and more teachers were getting involved. And we were having larger and larger, profound experiences with this real intention of working with story as a sacred healing art. And the more I journeyed into that path, the more doors opened. And that's really what I come here to tell you, is all the mysteries of all the what has been revealing in this process of really a devotion to understanding what is this gift of story that every single human has been given. No matter your social status, no matter what's in your bank account, no matter how many friends or how popular you are, we all have this tool that we were given through our birthright. And it's a tool of changing the world as we know it, both inside and externally. And so the more I get to understand this tool, the more I love sharing it with others. So let's begin with that key thing of, the power of words. Hawaiians say, and if you're hearing a lot of noise right now, there are a lot of active birds and things. I don't know if you guys get to hear them or not, or if Zoom zooms them out. But we're hearing the sounds of Hawaii. And Hawaiians say that words are so powerful that they can raise enough power to slow the world or to set it into motion. If you've ever gotten to see hula, this is a culture that's still alive and understanding the dignity of the power and the connection of humans to the natural world, and that our words can change the external world around us. The rains can be called to. Pele can be spoken to. The Sicilians say that words poke holes in the universe. And I think about that every time the temperature. I get a little, like when I get a little Aries, I got a little Aries moon in me. I got some fire, and when it starts to rise, I have to be really careful because once you say something, it stays forever. You can't ever undo a word that's been spoken. There's actually a word in physics that speaks to that once it's been spoken into a place, it always stays there. The Australians say that the stories of the past must be sung to the present in order for the future to exist. The Maoris say words don't describe a thing, they are the thing. And in Japan, they have a term called kotodama, and it means word spirit. And it refers to the original divine spirit of a word before it even enters the world of thought waves. Isn't that cool that they understand that? And what they're saying is that words are alive. They are alive, they have a spirit of their own, and they have the power to create. And if we have any word geeks out here, one of the most powerful tools I know is etymology dictionaries. If you ever start sniffing around your word and you're like, I don't know about that, it doesn't quite seem right, go back to the etymology, because oftentimes so many of these very powerful words have been hijacked to mean something else. And one of my favorite examples of this is apocalypse. How many people have a negative association with the term apocalypse? I'm just curious. I'm seeing some nodding, right? Michael Mead has done such a great job of revealing the true meaning and reminding us, no, it's a lifting of the veils. When you go back to the etymology of what those words mean, it means a lifting of the veil of the veils. It's about seeing what's truly there. So living in apocalyptic times is like, wow, right now we can really see the source of racism. We can see the source of sexism. We can see the injustice. And yeah, it's very disruptive and discombobulating. It is the end of a certain kind of time, but it's not the end of all of time. You know, so if you really want to get hold of your life, etymology dictionary is great. Abracadabra, a word from Aromatic mysticism. I create as I speak. It's one of the oldest words on our planet. I create as I speak. And all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. Isn't that something? That there is this, especially when we look at all the disagreement that's happening in the world, that we can understand that there's some core understandings about unique presence of humans on this planet. And I wouldn't say that just humans. I would say that the worlds are singing the world into being, and that the birds are singing the world into being, and God only knows what the stink bugs are singing into being. But it's like this idea, this understanding that our resonance is part of the creation process. Want to bring you a poem, and please don't record. I record this, and just so you guys know, when you do that, it creates a real disruption in my capacity to focus. So I'll be sending recordings, and thank you for wanting the value of this. I appreciate that. Um, Magic words. This is a really one of my favorite poems. In the very earliest time, when people and animals lived on Earth, a person could become an animal if he wanted to, and an animal could become a human being. Sometimes they were people, and there was no difference. All spoke the same language. That was a time when words were like magic. The human mind had mysterious powers. A word spoken by chance might have strange consequences. It would suddenly come alive. And what people wanted to happen could happen. All you had to do was say it. Nobody could explain this. That's just the way it was. That is a poem that was translated by the Inuit by Edward Field. And, it's always a beautiful question of how did it, well, how did that change? It's a worthy question for us to be in, but to also remember that this was the further away it gets, it begins to sound like fiction. And yet the stories that are continuously carried say, no, this was as real as Facebook is to us. So let's start talking about what does it do? What does a story do? And before I get into this, I'd love to hear you guys say, love to hear your voice. What is it? What's a story? If you want to place that into chat, I'd love to hear, what is it? What is a story? And one of the ways that I'll be talking about stories today is I'll be talking about like story as a verb. What does it do? What's its action? And story as a noun. And, one of the things that stories do is that they inform us. They explain, they give us our belief systems, our values. They help shape our worldview, our paradigm. They help us to find the world and ourselves within it. And one of the things that they are is they say that humans always refer to themselves in reference to the most recent technology. And so, using that kind of way of being, they're an operating system. It's an operating system. And, one of the things I love about this, you can always upgrade your operating system, right? It's not, you don't always, doesn't always work, but usually it does. Sometimes it does. And so when we look at that, and again, the words don't lie. What do they call our TV shows? Programming. Right. So now I really want to invite you to take a moment and really think about the programming that you've been exposed to. The kind of stories that were told in your home about who you should be, what role you should play, what you should expect from life. What were the TV shows that you were watching that gave you your ideas about what should you expect from romantic life? When was it time to get married? What was your role and responsibility to have children? What should you do in the world? How much money should you make? What is your relationship to doing versus being? So I really want to invite you to really think about the things that you were watching as a kid that really, informed your worldview and expectations. Now I want to invite you to come even a little bit closer to what are the stories that you're telling yourself right now? And in that way, I'm going to ask you, what TV shows do you watch every night before you go to bed that inform your sleeping consciousness? And how do you feel watching them? What are the movies that are catching your attention that you watch over and over again, or just, landed somewhere and there's an image that's now there forever? So they're very powerful. Now I want to talk about this thing, and when I first came to how do I talk about a story, like what is it? um I live in Topanga Canyon, and a lot of times I'll go for these morning walks. It's where I get the majority of my inspiration for what I bring to you. And one morning I was on one of those walks, and I heard, I don't know if it was the trees, the rocks, the wind. There was some loud voice, and it was really like Leah Lamb. I knew I was in trouble. They're like, that description of story as an operating system is just it's profane. And I'm like, yeah, but it's simple, it's in our language. And it's like, no, it's profane. You have to tell them the truth about what a story is. And I was like, well, what's the truth about what a story is? And they're like, it's a library of the soul. I have to give Topanga Canyon, the wildness of Topanga Canyon, credit for that language coming to you. And I really, every time I ask what it means, and I invite you just to also be in the wondering, what does that mean that a story is a library of the soul? And as I listen to it, it means that their consciousness is so much grander than this one moment in time, than this one human body, and that our stories have access to carry consciousness from 4,000 years ago. I mean, it's kind of mind blowing that we have something that can carry the consciousness from so long ago, and yet we can still bring it forward. That David or Gloria or Carolee can tell a story about their life, and they can bring in it their own wisdom, and through their wisdom ways that maybe was informed by their great grandparents, that was passed down into their life experience. Now they tell me that story, and now I get gifted this amazing gift that was far beyond my own life experience. So it's like we have these access of these libraries of consciousness every time we come into connection to other people and come into the kind of presence where we can really receive what they have to offer. And there's something else that stories do, is that they create this kind of constellation of belonging, that stories are not linear. They're not literal. They're not made up of facts and information. There's something far larger than that. And so when we start to really come to this as like story as a noun, a place that you can go, a place that you can be, a place where you can receive information far greater than yourself. Now we're starting to get into this conversation of like, well, what is a sacred story? You know, and even before that, I really want to offer a completely another way of looking at story, where if we look at this body, this great body that we each have. And I think that there's a lot of agreement, and maybe you don't have agreement on this, but I'm gonna act as if we do, that our body is a temple for the soul. Our soul gets to inhabit this body and have this human experience through it. And this story is a vehicle for spirit. And so when stories come into us, we get to experience the spirit of that. So if I'm telling you this, great hot romantic story that I just experienced, I get to share it, and I get to share it with you, and you actually get to receive the oxytocin, you get to receive all that same experience, the spirit of joy, the spirit of love. It comes through me, I get to live it, and then I get to share it with you through a story. And so we also have this kind of energetic exchange that's happening. I can bring in the story of joy. I can also bring in the story of grief. I can bring in the story of hate. Wow, when you look around Facebook, I just love, it is such a trip when you go on Facebook and you can write something, and then all the different comments that come down, and you can see how differently people see the same words, right? And they have all these different responses and reactions. It is just, an extraordinary tool for being able to see just how different we all are, and how differently we see different things, and how we meet them all with different energies and different stories. So, okay, sacred story. What are we talking about here? When we're talking about a story as being sacred, it comes from Latin. It means to make holy. It means to make whole. When we look at this word, and one of the things that I love about this idea of sacred is I'm saying, okay, I see the divine in you. I see the divine in you. So when I'm saying I see a sacred story, I'm saying, oh, I see the wholeness in you. And the wholeness in you, I mean, I see the life in you. And when we call something sacred, in some ways it's a setup, because I'm saying, oh, that sacred mountain. Well, does that mean that that mountain is sacred, so the one next to it isn't sacred just by the employment of the language? It's kind of a strange little thing. So, but what it's an animistic perspective of saying, I see the life in you. So when we say a story is sacred, we're saying, oh, okay, I see the life in you, that you're not mine. It's sort of like, um, you know, people who have children, they birth these incredible children, you shape them, you form them, but they're not yours. They've got their own life. Same thing with our stories. This is kind of a funny thing, because I'm a writer, and I've written some books, and some people have said, oh gosh, you birthed your book, and I'm like, oh God, don't use the birth analogy with me. That book is never going to hold my hand. It's not going to play with me. It just toiled with me, and I guess it did play with me. We had a lot of fun when I created it, but it's like, and then it's done. It's not going to take care of me at the end of the day. you know Not that children are guaranteed to do that either. But my point is that I had this real resistance to thinking of that creation energy being used in the same way with books as with children. And I got so curious about it that I wrote an article for Fast Company about it, about this idea of actually, I call it the postpartum creation process, because I noticed that every time I would go in to do these big edits, I would come out and I would feel really depressed when I was done. It was like this real letdown, and I was curious about it. So I started interviewing all these very famous authors, and to see if this was just my bizarre phenomenon, or if this was a common thing. And I was talking to Jack Canfield, the author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. And he's like, oh yeah, no, my kids are my books. My books are my kids. It's like, I love them. I'm really sad when they're gone. I miss them, but I'm also happy when they leave the house. They're absolutely my children. And I was like, oh, right. There is this metaphor if we're using our creation energy in the same way. And so I mention this because our stories, they have a life in them, and we do give them life. They give them life through our heart, through the spark of that ignited energy through our heart, but that there's something else that's happening, the sacred story. And as I understand it, it's a story that is infused with not only my own energy, but the energy of the unseen world. And some might call that spirits, some might call that guardians or angels or God, or I don't use any of those language. I like just to say life force, the muse. There's that unseen energy of life that comes through. And then there's also that connection to earth. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And when those two energies come together and get ignited through our heartbeat, we give them life, we give them resonance, we give them shape and sound so that they can take form and they can literally change the world. Martin Luther King Jr. That's a very powerful dream that he shared. Change the world. You know, the first guy that invented a helicopter. I wish I could remember his name. He saw a dragonfly, got super inspired, told someone he had this crazy idea. I'm sure a lot of people thought he was crazy, right? But he built it because he saw it and he spoke it and he got other people to believe. So that's really powerful. All it is an imagination, a couple of words, and boom, we're changing the shape and form of matter. So, when we talk about a sacred story, it's like we're exalted, right? When you hear a sacred story, you feel more alive, you feel more juicy, you feel like you want to get up the next morning and you're going to exercise and you're going to quit sugar and you're going to quit smoking and you're going to quit caffeine. You're just going to be the best version of yourself ever. You feel good. You feel good in the form of a sacred story. You feel enlivened, you feel nourished, you feel full. So what's the flip side of that? And I think that right now, start thinking about the TV shows that you're watching, the movies that you're watching, the hysteria that you're listening to. Oh my God, the news that we're listening to, and now I want to start saying, okay, well, what if this isn't so hoity-toity, fluffy? What's a zombie story? And a zombie story, if a sacred story is here in service of life, okay, it's going to bring you closer together. It's going to give you more energy. It's going to call out your wisdom. It's going to inspire your greatness. It's going to give you courage. It's going to give you grace. It's going to give you access to your generosity. It's going to give you access to your grief, right? It's giving you access to your human self. A zombie story does the exact opposite. It shuts you down. It disconnects. It plants fear. It plants anxiety. It plants separation. Now, look, I'm not talking about being ignorant of the world politics. I'm not talking about looking away because you don't like what you're seeing. Okay. That is not the message that I'm giving. But I am really inviting you to really start listening to and for where your story is coming from. What are their source? What are their sources' intentions? What is your storyteller in service to? Why are they giving life to the story that they're giving life to? And when we start to ask those basic questions, all of a sudden we've got our sacred storytelling goggles on, where we can start to see more clearly what's going on. And so zombie stories are, they're the ones that are kind of life sucking. You walk away and you're like, people suck. The end of the world's coming. There's nothing I can do. Might as well go have some more popcorn and cotton candy and watch Friends rerun for the fifth time. It's like whatever your thing is. And so and I want to give an example of a zombie story because I don't think there's a bunch of bad people out there trying to tell bad stories, but I am questioning if people really understand what they're doing. And when we're in a consumer capitalistic driven entertainment industry that is designed to feed off of your weaknesses, sorry to put it that way, then now we want to be more aware of being able to spot them. So an example is Jaws. Jaws was created by Peter Benchley. He wrote the book. He was kind of inspired. He heard about a great white shark. And Steven Spielberg picked that up as a story. It was one of the first movies that he ever made. And it was a revolutionary historical moment because it was the first film that they ever made out in the open ocean. And their big prop broke. And they're fast moving on their feet. And so they figured, well, they would just shoot little pieces of it so that it would become the symbol of a shark, right? They would get the essence of it. Now, look, you might not speak the language of story, but the language of story speaks you. And it speaks not through literal language. It speaks through symbol and metaphor and archetypes. And so what happened in that movie was that this shark took on the symbolic reference of the thing that humans are most afraid of, death. Our oldest story speaks about our greatest fear of death. And so what happened was that movie created this singular sensation of extreme fear and also this capacity to have to kill off this keystone species in the ocean, which is incredibly linked to our own health and wellness. And by the way, most of them are docile. very few sharks, and more people, they say, die from coconuts every year, falling out of trees and hitting them, than we do out of shark deaths. You know, so when Peter Benchley actually started to, learn about the impact of his that story, he spent the rest of his life as an ocean protector. So I say this because I don't think that there's a bunch of bad people with bad intentions, but I do think this is the time to come online and really understand how much power and influence we have with every story that we tell. So you can ask these questions. Is the story tending life? Is it building connection? Is it helping unify us? Is it leaving us feeling nourished? Or does this story disrupt life? Does it separate us? Is it spreading fear? Is it planting anxiety? Is it leaving you hungry? Do you need more? I need something more to be a good, full, whole being. And what is the transmission? What's the energy that's living inside that energy that gets spread to you? So we love this idea also. It's like we can't talk about storytelling without talking about what a myth is. And, they say that myths are the earth speaking out loud. Sean Kane says that. He's the author of Wisdom of the Myth Tellers, which is a great book. It's really, if you want a foundational book, that's a great one. And I personally am fabulously in love with myths. And to me, they speak to my soul. They're wild creatures. They are running the wild. They haven't been captured by the pen. They've got no author. They will change and shape shift, and we have myths. They'll change, they'll move across continents. This is why, when you really want to get to know old stories, start to learn how they're living in different parts of the world, and they don't allow ordinary thinking. They don't speak through linear language. Again, they speak through this language of symbol and metaphor. And it requires this animistic perspective, this way of seeing everything as alive. And it's not that they've stopped being created, they're still here, they're still around. So as storytellers, one of our key jobs is to listen, to really listen for the stories of our time. And so if you want to go to the language of story, then you've got to speak the language of story. You go to France, you learn French, right? You go to Spain, you learn Spanish. You want to go to the language of the world of story, then you really want to engage the language of symbol, metaphor, and archetypes. And what is metaphor but the language of spirit? Taking shape and form through story, speaking to us through our material world. It's such a gift that somehow story, that the unseen world, can figure out how to speak our own language through metaphor. So, this is a great moment to really start considering, like, who are you as a storyteller? And how do we understand this role across the world? In Japan, they say it's the person of the falling word. I love that. It's so poetic. In Welsh, they're called a recounter, which actually speaks to keeping tally, keeping tabs. It's arithmetic. But they understand in Welsh that the storyteller, it's a guide. And I really think about that because as storytellers, we can take people on deep journeys and we can show them the horrors of humanity, and we can give teaching stories and wisdom stories. And we can take people to the center of their own consciousness, and we can open different doors, but they won't go unless we're a trustworthy guide. And a trustworthy guide will not take you into a hell zone and leave you there. A trustworthy guide will always bring you home. And so I really want to invite you to think about that, to consider what that means, and think about the kind of stories that are who's taking you where. In Africa, the griot's role was to preserve the genealogies and oral traditions. So we understand that was part of the role of the storyteller, to be the memory keepers of life. In Celtic cultures, a bard, they were a professional storyteller, but they were a verse maker. They were music composers. They were oral historians. They were genealogists. But there was also something else. I do not romanticize the role of the bard, okay? Because they were employed by a patron, and they were there to commemorate one of those patrons, ancestors, and to exalt them. So they were literally singing for their dinner. So I really want to really, it's good to know the history of these languages because oftentimes, people say, "Oh, you're a bard." I'm like, "Oh God, don't call me a bard." Not to say that it's not a worthy, incredible role in that culture, but there's an underlying pinning to that piece. And in ancient Africa and Celtic, this is a gorgeous quote that comes to us from Ben Okri. I just love it. Storytellers were the magicians, they were the initiates. They understood the underlying nature of reality, the hidden forces. The old Celtic bards could bring out welts on the body with a string of syllables. Imagine. They could heal sickness with a tale. They could breathe life into a dying civilization with the magic of a story. To a thriving civilization, they could bring transformation with the potency of myth. In the old days, kings and leaders, warriors and knights listened to epic tales and drew them from courage and inspiration. I mean, what is it to walk in the world knowing that that's what you do in every room that you walk into? So, when we talk about this, what is it to be a sacred storyteller? That we are the ultimate alchemists, that we are the ones who are bringing together the earth and spirit to shape form. And that when we come with the intention to heal, when we come with the intention to do great work with people, it's just an extraordinary, extraordinary position. And I would say the second most powerful position, the first being the listener. Because without a great listener, the stories will not live on. So, in some ways, the idea that the storyteller is the one that has the power, they're the conductors of energy. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that in one of the next classes. But it's the listener that is really the one that determines which stories are going to take seed in our consciousness, which stories will we feed and nourish, repeat, and give continued life to. So these stories, we're talking about that they've got these energies and that they can, it's like a lot of, in Eastern principles, there's a chakra system. We've got these energy pulses through our bodies, and that these stories, we have these, it's like life lives through us through story, and story lives through us through life, and, so you might have a really traumatic experience that happens in your life. And I don't know that we get out alive without having some of those happen. They happen to all of us. And if we have the skills and tools and supports and guides to move through that energy, that's luck of the draw, I think, or maybe not, or self-determination. But, my point with this is that stories, they can get stuck. They can get stuck in us, and they can get stuck in our bodies and they can start manifesting, in physical ailments. They can get stuck in our neural pathways, and they can get on a little racetrack and just keep cruising round and round and round. And one of the things that you have an opportunity to do when we really understand what is a story is you can actually start to work with them, when we understand that storytellers can actually bring healing, that we can actually begin to transform and release the stories that we're living in by the ways that we tell them. And this is something that I really focus on a course called Medicine Stories. But I really want to, support this understanding that, um, you know, when we feel stuck in our lives, it could be as simple as that we've got a story that's jamming the highway of energetic life force, and when we can get to the center of it, things can shift and change. So, one of the ways that we engage story as a healing tool, is we can say, okay, I really want to alchemize, I want to transmute, I want to shift and transform this energy. And one of the ways that we do that is, there's a great talk that you should go see. And oh gosh, I wish I could remember this man's name. But if you Google Charlottesville TEDx story, you're going to find him. And he does the most incredible explanation of how his mother taught him never to tell the same story twice. He'd broken his leg, and she wanted to make sure they never told it twice in the same way. And this was mom wisdom. This was saying that, in order to heal, in order to change your story, you have to allow yourself to be changed by the story. You are no longer the person that story happened to. You're different. And so when we understand that our role as storytellers is to grow and change and shift and how we tell the stories, now all of a sudden we're getting to tell a different story and we're getting to change roles and we don't keep ourselves stuck in that place. So that's a very small example. Stories, one of the things that they do is we know they build connection. They open our hearts. They when we share our stories, we aren't alone in them. And I think that's really an important piece that sometimes people will isolate and they'll be in the state of shame and blame, and what do we know? When people come out and they share their story of difference, all of a sudden they're not so special anymore. There's a lot of other people that often are having a similar experience. And this connection, this union emerges because of the bravery and courage that it takes. So to really shift out of a story, it's not but it's not like it's an initiation. It requires bravery and courage. And one of the things that really supports us in this is having good community. You can't just tell your story to anybody. You've got to be in a place where people know how to carry stories and they want to carry stories. Um, they provide us a place to practice being human together. Now, listen, this is the least sexiest way that I can explain what we do. But it's just true. And I really believe that we're in this place where we get to practice basic humaning 101 together. Meaning that when we come into relationship as storytellers, we're doing this thing where we are embodying the cycle of life. And what do we know about one of the source challenges that we're experiencing on this planet in a time of great extraction is that we've lost our relationship to the giving, receiving, gratitude cycle of life, right? The giving and receiving cycle of life. And, there's a lot of, old indigenous teachings on this. I'm not going to go into that right now. But when we're in a true state of story, we have the gift of presence with us. And when your storyteller comes with something to give, I'm going to give you something. I've got something of great value. I'm going to give it to you. And when the story listener, the story co-creator, and that's what really listeners are, they are co-creators in reality. When they are present and they receive someone's story, okay, that receiving, that presence gives energy back. And now we're in this energetic connective field. And it sounds so simple, this practice of coming to give, coming to receive. The gift of that, just that union is something that so many of us don't get to experience anymore. When we're in this information age, give me the facts, give me the information, this constant interruption. So storytelling is very different. So if you're around storytellers, you're going to say, so what'd you do today? Well, storyteller is not going to say, well, I went to the post office and did this. The storyteller is going to take you on a journey. Well, you wouldn't believe, I had this wild idea about fairies this morning. And I was thinking about those fairies, and I remembered I got to send my postcard to my grandma, and so I went to the post office to take it to my grandma. And the next thing I know, I see this person in front of me, and I swear to God, she had feathers falling out of her jacket. I think she was a fairy. It's like storytellers, they're not straight lines of people. They talk with a journey. And it's a different way of engaging. And it's an older way of engaging. And one of the key pieces around it is that there was an understanding that when you spoke, you had something to say. And so when people spoke, then other people listened. And this is the thing that I really want to encourage is this gift of being in that kind of relationship. Um, One of the other things that we have when we talk story, and one of the great benefits of it is, oh my God, it's really fun. It's just fun. You get to engage so much more life. You get to engage all these different characters. You get to engage the highs and the lows, and you get to live all of this life through you, and it's a beautiful expression. One of our guest teachers, Kim, and she was amazing. She said, can I come tell scary stories? And I'm like, yeah, please. She was like, yeah, that's where I get out all my bad stuff. I get all my shadow out in my story so I don't have to live in my everyday life. Isn't that great? I think that was so brilliant. So she tells these horrible, scary stories and gets to be her worst mean self and she gets to get it out. But wow, what a sense of self-awareness, and so we get to play with life. You know. The other key piece that, when we really work with storytelling in a conscious way, and the distinction to me between like an ego-driven story, which is, this is my story, I'm going to tell it to you for the purpose of blah, 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 is, when we engage in a sacred story, all of a sudden it's something bigger. We're talking about that life force and it's bigger than me. And now we're talking about my universal experience. And now all of a sudden, I'm getting access to the unseen world because I understand that my story is actually our story. So when I come to you to tell you a story, which I'll tell you in a little bit about, about my own personal journey with cancer and all of that, I'm not telling you about cancer. I'm telling you about the universal experience of initiation. For when we come at that point to tell that great story, all of a sudden, if I just think that I'm the only one that can tell the story from my own experience, that then it's a small story. But when we open up to allow the muse to inspire us and inform us about what is the greater story, the story of our soul, now we get to start to see our life as a constellation. And all the different pieces start to weave and wander and connect to make a greater story. And I really don't believe you can do this from an ego-driven mind. That this is a humble act. It's a devotional act of being in deep connection with the all. And when you come into that kind of relationship with your storytelling, when you understand that as I share my story, I'm sharing our story, and it's a gift, all of a sudden, different things can happen. Okay, so all I know is that how you tell your story is how you're going to live your story. The stories that we tell ourselves are very convincing. So if you're stuck in the story of scarcity, if you're stuck in the story of I'm never going to get the love I want, if you're going to get stuck in the job, I'm never going to have the life I want, or the job I want, or the blah, 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 then people are going to believe you. Our stories are very convincing, you know. And so really, I want to inspire you to really consider what are the stories that you're telling about yourself, because oftentimes people will respond to you like that. So the journey of a sacred storyteller, it's a big one. It's a big one. And, this is, we come into relationship with that unseen relationship, the muse. But to be able to have that relationship, you got to have some psychic silence, right? This thing has got to be able to find some quiet. And I don't know about how you find quiet, but I get it through motion. It's not always through meditation. I get it through walking, but you also have to like have a clear space. Your taxes need to be done. You know, your room has to be clean. All of this stuff, all how you relate to matter matters. And all of that holds energy. And so when we want to make space for the unseen world to be in relationship to us, there's got to be some psychic silence. There's got to be some space. So that's where you get to have the information, the inspiration, that exalted, like, where the muse is whispering in your ear. I don't think she often comes to me if my room's a mess. Definitely doesn't come when my desk is a mess. So, you want to be able to look at the obstacles of life, and the obstacles of your life force. And rather than say, oh, that barrier, punch it out, I love looking at those obstacles as being like, oh, it's an initiation. Oh, I'm at a threshold, again, we're doing some framing. And when we start framing it and we start saying, okay, well, what needs to be left behind? What do I need to shift and change to get more access to pass through this gateway, to go to the other side? Sort of like if we've got gamers here. Um, the other thing that in terms of storytellers, you have to know where you come from. We understand that. It's like you got to know what got you here to fully understand your story. You also want to, look within in terms of what are the stories that have been creating you in this lifetime. I really love getting to explore your storyteller archetype. And when we're looking at your storyteller archetype, what we're doing is we're saying, what are you in service to? And I'm going to go a little bit deeper into that a little bit down the way. Stand in the power of your gift. That's so powerful. Like when you really know that you've got something to give, the power of what you say is so strong. How many of us have been around people who don't raise their voice, but everybody listens to? We've all seen it. This is not about being the loudest, grandest speaker. This is about being the most authentic, true to who you are and how your wisdom flows through. And so being able to find your unique way is where your power and potency comes from. Developing your skill and craft, you're going to see that I put that in an unusual place. A lot of times in modern day schools, they want to teach you that right away. And I've seen more people have the genius pushed out of them by doing that. And the genius, as I refer to it, as Michael Mead speaks about it, it's this life force that lives through us, And so what we do here is we say, well, let's court your genius. Let's see what your unique stuff is. Let's see what you got. And then we'll shape and form it and give you some skill and technique and craft. some of the journeys that we do is you got to know your own personal mythos. We talked about your own personal stories, where you come from, your genealogy, all that stuff. But what about the story of your soul? What about your mythic self? Are you a lighthouse? Are you a doorway? Are you a key? What is that larger expression of your soul that's being acted out in the human dimension? Um, and I can't say this enough, that really truly great storytellers are listeners first. And it's about being in devotion and service to those around you, and really understanding what is the medicine that they need. What is the stories that are being called for? And can you come with such devotion that you really listen for that those are the stories that you bring? One of the most powerful tools that you can have is know how to change a story. I'll be doing a whole class on that in a couple of days. And then you want to alchemize your story so that you really understand the power of its medicine. And then, boom, you get to offer the gift. It's a fun. This is not linear, just so you know. We made this as a spiral because storytelling is not linear. The journey is not linear. You might want to start thinking about, well, what kind of storyteller am I? A lot of different stories come through us, but this is one way of kind of simplifying and wondering, and it's like perhaps you're a midwife. You're someone that's like got your ear open and you're listening for the new stories of our time. Perhaps you're that story mentor when someone comes to you and they say, yes or no, what should I do? And you hold them, you give them a story so they can find their own wisdom that's living inside them. Maybe you're an alchemist and you're shape shifting and taking different stories and saying how and understanding when we mix these two different things, we can create something else. Perhaps you're a healer and you really know that your stories can heal. And there's a whole medical profession now. Narrative medicine is incredible. Perhaps you're that wisdom keeper who can really help people find those hardest times in life and understand how to cultivate the genius, the wisdom, the power, the potency that was lived through the experience. Perhaps you're a visionary and you're one of those people among us who are planting the seeds of the future everywhere you go, the future that we want to live in. What a great role that is. We need more of those. Maybe you're an archaeologist and you're digging up the old stories, finding, hey, what do you got for us? Are there universal wisdoms that are there? The dreamer weaver is a very common archetype of the storyteller. That's person that's going into the dream field and weaving it into present time. And I mentioned before the cantador, this person that carries old stories. So, whew, that was a lot of talking, you guys. I don't usually talk this much in classes. Gloria can attest for that. Usually it's really about you guys talking. But I was really inspired to bring you guys to the threshold of courting story in another way. And one of the ways that I do it is I do it through the School for Sacred Storytelling. And in that way, we have 5 different story modalities that I usually work with. One of them is teaching stories. These are almost lost art. How to let stories be the nannies. How to help them do the good work of teaching young people around us and older people too. Wisdom stories are those stories that you're like, oh God, my heart was broken, or I lost everything, or these traumatic events, and how do we go back and really clear out the stuck energies? How do we get to that place of forgiveness if it needs to happen around betrayal, different things, so that we can live in a more liberated expression of it and glean the gift of the experience for our soul. And so now we're telling a different story. Personal mythos, what that's, I was talking a little bit about that, but your grander, more mythic story, your own origin and creation story, medicine stories. This to me is one of the get out of jail quick cards. And these are stories that I use or call on when in a jam, you're in the middle of something and you can't get out. And you're not ready to tell the story because you don't even know what the story is. You're so in the thick of the forest. And sometimes we can call on stories to bring healing in that moment. We can call for almost like a prescription. We can go to the pharmacy and be like, I'm in the deepest grief, give me some joy, stat, and we can work with stories in that way. And then vision stories, these are those stories that are like where we're consciously planting the seeds. I have a membership program and we meet every full moon just to tell vision stories because we can't get enough of them. It's a really fun co-creation process that we get to play with. That's how I do it. But I also want to say, like, look, we're talking story all the time. and some examples of where we're seeing it that you were probably participating, obviously the Truth and Reconciliation gatherings that were happening in South Africa. What a powerful example story, you know. We can also look at, witnessing circles, in terms of being in the power of that kind of listening, initiations. Story is plays a critical role in the initiatory journeys. Social impact campaigns, when we're looking at telling stories, especially in documentaries now, where we want to direct people to take action. We can really work with it that way. In council, when we're doing community work, these are all places where it's happening all the time. So what I'm going to do is over the next 3 days, I'm going to teach 3 more of these kinds of classes, all on different ways and doorways of approaching it. And tomorrow I'm going to be teaching a class called How to Open Hearts and Change the World with Every Story You Tell. And that's really more on how to engage your audience. I'm going to talk about how to change a story. And I'm also going to go into working with story as ceremony. So just so you know, those are the next 3 days happening. And, as we come around the end of this class, I love this quote, and it's so powerful. Act as if you are people of consequence, so that I can treat you as such, and that you matter. I'm just going to say that again. This is by Stephen Jenkinson, and he really instilled this, and that you matter. What must have happened to people who unconsciously agreed that the best presence in this world is to have no consequence in this world? It's a velvet gauntlet, this idea of being of consequence. It doesn't clink when it hits the ground, but you can feel it. It would be proper to proceed that there is consequence to us being here. That's by, yeah, right? Stephen Jenkinson. I hear you, Elaine. It's like, whew, you can't read that enough, and that's really how I've come to understand storytelling, that when we really understand that we have consequence, that we matter, that our voice matters, that our life experience is a gift to be given when we've done the work of alchemizing, transforming, and really gleaning the potency and power of our lives. And so in a time of such great initiation, of such great challenge, the more we can get on board with really gleaning the power of what it is to be living through this time, we can not only stand as guardians of our own life, but pillars for those around us. And some of us might be in the role of leader or teacher or guide or facilitator. But I'm teaching a course, and I'll tell you about it in a moment. But I love it because I also say it's for angels in the making, meaning that anyone can share a word at a potent time in someone's life and have a dramatic effect. And so when we understand how consequential we are and how much we are needed, it changes the way we walk through the world, and it changes the way we use every word that we speak. So that is our story for today, our class. We are complete. And if you feel inspired and you want to continue to take a journey with me, I'm going to now go into another chapter, and I'm going to take about 10 minutes, maybe 5. It's been a lot of talking. I know that we're all full. But I'm going to share a little bit about this, the alchemy of story. And that's where we're headed now. So if you feel complete, lovely to be with you. And if not, here we are. So if you want to play and you're like, oh, I'm in, I want to play. I can feel the resonance. I can feel that this could be my people. Then, one of the things I love is, again, how do we flip the stories? Creators, we thrive in chaos. Just so you know, I just want to tell you that, as worlds gets unstable, creative people, it's like, every origin story in the world begins, a lot of them, in the darkness. It took me a long time to get that. And it's like I think of as chaos as a creator as like you're in the great grocery store. You're like, oh, I'll have a little bit of that, I'll have a little bit of that, I'll have a little bit of that. There's so much material to work with in chaotic times. And so I'm really inspired to be hosting these places in this time, because it's a really powerful time for creators, a very activating time for creators. and especially when you're consciously creating. So some of the ways I work with people is I do one-on-one work. I call it story priestessing, and it's everything for people who are in the process of creating something in an artistic expression. I've worked as a producer, as a writer, as a I'm losing my words now. I've produced things from A to Z, from films to books to everything. So if you want someone to help you cross the threshold and what that takes, it is my joy to help people with that. But as I understand, it's not just the creation that we're working with. We're working with the creator and who you are as a human and the blocks and barriers that you're tending to and what needs to happen for you to get to that great expression of creation. I also do one-on-one work with people called soul stories. And that is a very, it's a form of ancient divination storytelling where I do one-on-one sessions and I see the mythic expression of your life. And we get to play with how that's in your consciousness. And then I also do consulting with people who are really wanting to make a difference with their stories. They want their stories they're in service of some kind of healing or change or transformation. And one of the things that I used to do back in the day was I used to build really big social impact campaigns. I don't build them anymore, but I love helping people and giving a little bit of guidance to people and consulting with them to help really think about how to create really strong, powerful, strategic allyships when they're wanting to make their stories walk with intention in the world. And then there are these online courses. I'm going to guide you through some of those right now because we have one that's coming up and it is called The Alchemy of Story. And this is through, the School for Sacred Storytelling, which is this beautiful creature that I get to steward. And it's been an incredible journey. We've featured over 40, now it's almost 60 guest teachers from around the globe. Had over 1,000 people walk through our threshold and journey with what is this to be sacred storytelling. And it's been a long journey. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is that it's I'm in it to win it, meaning that like I love creating spaces where we can really learn in powerful ways together. And so one of the things that I've done is I've developed after being with people for a long time online and seeing what works and what doesn't work, I found that intensive experiences actually give us the most space to have the most amount of ways to integrate what we're learning and then have time in between these learning sessions to work with small groups to integrate what we've done. And it's like in a time when we're all so busy and running around and doing so many things, getting to have these windows of focus time, I feel like is one of the most powerful ways that we can really get all the way in to the kind of content that we're working with. So this program is for two different kinds of people. It's on one hand, we have these 5 modules that we'll be doing over the course next year. And if you really want to understand how to work with a story to bring healing to yourself, that those 5 modules will really teach you those 5 different modalities of stories. And it will really bring you into an empowered place around what is it to be a conscious creator in these times and how to live in sovereignty over the stories that you both live, tell, and share with others. And then there's this other piece, which is the certification. And the certification is for people who say, I want to actually really help other people tell their stories. I want to learn how to work with stories, a tool for healing and for my community or and beyond just myself. And that's a different kind of program where we meet in between all those different times and we do one-on-one sessions and there's a practicum and all that different kinds of stuff. We've got 18 amazing guest teachers. I think we've got a couple more coming in. And the thing that really mattered to me was that we had a global perspective, that we had authentic indigenous wisdom, because there's a kind of transmission that's coming through those oral traditions, and that we had healers, people who understand that when we're working with story, we've got there's a transmission that's happening, and how do we actually be guardians of our own self as healers and when we talk story. And so it's an aspect of storytelling that you don't normally hear about. So it's a unique aspect of this class. And then we also just have people who are just freaking brilliant. And they all hold really different threads of understanding how to get into your own story and how to work with your own story. And so from MacArthur Genius winners to people who wrote the book on how to hold counsel to extraordinary mythologists, this is I am so honored to be with this group of people. Our mission as a school, it's not just about how to tell a story. Obviously, you're onto it. I'm not going to help you teach a story, tell a story to sell your business. or to increase your social impact on in your Facebook, but what we are in the business of is if you really want to be a part of the healing and the restoration, repair of our planet, and you understand that storytelling is one of the key tools, one of the most powerful tools that humans were given to do that, that's what we're coming here to do. And so that's what really inspires me. And so one of the things you get is you get to be guided by really masterful teachers who will all give you specific tools and practices that you can engage in your own life. These are very interactive classes. You'll never hear me talk as much. It's really, I talk a little and then you guys get to practice and you get a lot of time to be with each other. You get a lot of time to practice, to be seen and to practice being seen, and to get to be held by a community where we are committed to looking for and calling out each other's greatness. It's one of my favorite parts of the people who come together is that we're in it for each other as much as we are for ourselves. How do we call that out? And it's a really unique environment in that way. And then you also have a private online community. You get replays forever. So this is a place where you will build your confidence, you'll develop your leadership skills, you improve your communication. I'm telling you, people, I've had so many, it's like, it's not therapy, but it can be therapeutic. And I've seen people tell me incredible life-changing stories, both in their work world and their professional world and their personal world. And you'll definitely, your human skills will get all the better. Oops, that's going to be next. So that is our, you know what? There's something else I was going to show you. Hold on. Oh, it might be gone. Is it gone? Nope, that's it. Sorry, guys. I won't be showing you any more about the story of alchemy. But if you guys want me to learn more about that, what I would recommend is setting up an information session with me. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you 2 links. And if anyone has any questions, you can definitely, I'll stay on the line. And one of the things that we're doing, which is very different than I've ever done, is that these classes are going to be all offered for free for the next 4 days. And then after that, what we'll do is I'll be putting together the transcription and I'll also create an action guide for each class. So if you want to just go deeper into integrating what we talked about, that will be there. And it's going to be available for $37 for all 4 classes and those action guides. So it's a way for you if you're saying, wow, that was amazing. These 4 classes was great. I want to integrate it. It really, I love sharing this information. It also really supports the School for Sacred Storytelling as we give this information and share it. And if you're ready and you're like, wow, I want to go on a deep dive, I'm going to give you, it's a having your brain, it's a scheduling code. There we go. I'll give you my scheduling link and you can schedule a one-on-one session with me. And that is where if you have more questions or you want to understand which part of the program is right for you, you might just go and you just might know, that's how we can do that. So I will give you that right here in the chat. And that leaves us today for our time. And if you'd like to have any questions, I'd be happy to stay on for a moment and give them to you. And otherwise, we can say farewell and I'll see you all soon.